In 1666, the roar of cannons echoed across the North Sea. For the Kingdom of England, victory seemed within grasp. The Second Anglo-Dutch War was supposed to be a triumph, a demonstration of naval might that would secure trade routes and national pride. The British fleet, returning to port battered but unbroken, with flags still flying high, certainly looked like a victorious force. Cheers from the shore greeted the sailors, but as the noise faded, a chilling silence took its place. On board, officers huddled over maps, not to plot the next glorious battle, but to tally the grim cost. The marks of damage, of ships lost, and of men who would never return painted a different picture. Britain believed it was winning. It had won skirmishes and major engagements. But this tactical success bred a dangerous overconfidence, a comforting illusion that masked a much darker reality. Because victory on the waves does not mean you control the war. Beneath the veneer of success, the fleet was on the edge of total exhaustion. The ships themselves were a testament to the brutal fighting. Cracked masts, sails ripped to ribbons by cannonballs, and hulls leaking seawater told a story of survival, not dominance. For every ship that made it back, the question was how quickly it could be seaworthy again, and the answer was not fast enough. The naval yards were overwhelmed, struggling just to patch the holes, let alone build new vessels. The men were in even worse shape. On deck, exhausted crews slept wherever they could find space, their bodies pushed to the absolute limit. Below, the sick bays were a vision of hell. The stench of disease and the sight of amputations were constant reminders of the human cost. Hammocks hung empty, monuments to the fallen. These sailors were sick, underpaid, and bone-weary. A fleet can fight a battle, or it can endure a long war. It can rarely do both. Britain's navy existed on paper, but it was losing its ability to project sustained power. It was a hollow force, bleeding from 1,000 cuts. While the fleet was physically breaking down, the nation funding it was financially collapsing. War, then as now, is an insatiable beast, and it was devouring England's fragile post-restoration economy. The treasury, which was meant to be the lifeblood of the war effort, was running on fumes. Gold and silver, once symbols of royal power, were now just echoes in empty vaults. This financial crisis rippled outward. With the government's credit collapsing, the flow of essential supplies, timber for repairs, gunpowder for cannons, food for the crews slowed to a trickle. Worst of all, the pay chests for the sailors were delayed or never arrived at all. In the dockyards, skilled workers laid down their tools, refusing to work without wages. The very sailors who had risked their lives in battle now faced the indignity of begging for their pay. The irony was devastating. The cost of firing cannons in a single battle was a fraction of what it took to keep a fleet maintained, supplied, and crewed for months on end. England was winning the firefights, but it was decisively losing the financial war. Far from the smoke-filled sea, another war was being waged, a war of politics against strategy. In the halls of Parliament, debates raged. Different factions, with competing interests, argued over the war's direction. Was the goal to crush the Dutch Republic completely, or just to secure favorable trade terms? This division at the highest levels of leadership paralyzed long-term planning. Advisors whispered in the king's ear, their counsel shaped more by political maneuvering than by sound military reality. As a result, the crown favored short-term, glorious victories that could be celebrated in London, rather than undertaking the risky but decisive actions needed to truly end the conflict. This hesitation and infighting had a direct impact on the fleet. Orders from London were often delayed, contradictory, or simply too late to be effective. By the time a command reached the admiral at sea, the strategic window had often closed. The war was being directed by politicians, not by sailors who understood the winds and tides. Decisions were being made for the court, not for the sea. And history has shown time and again that wars are most often lost far from any battlefield. All this time, Britain fundamentally misunderstood its enemy. While England sought a decisive, glorious naval showdown, the Dutch played a different game entirely. Their strategy was not to win, but simply not to lose. They knew they couldn't match the Royal Navy blow for blow in a war of attrition, so they didn't try. They focused on defense, preserving their fleet and protecting their most vital asset, trade. Dutch convoys, the source of their immense wealth, continued to slip through the English blockade, using their knowledge of the treacherous shallow waters and fortified home ports to their advantage. Their shipyards were models of efficiency, repairing damaged vessels with astonishing speed. Money kept flowing into the Dutch Republic's coffers, funding their resilience. For the Dutch, survival was victory. Every day the war continued without their economic collapse was a day they won. They were not trying to sink the British fleet. They were trying to outlast the British will to fight. And Britain, blinded by its own desire for a climactic battle, completely ignored this quiet, stubborn advantage. And so came the moment of truth, the opportunity Britain failed to grasp. After the great battles, the Dutch fleet was wounded and vulnerable. A final, decisive blow could have ended the war. This was the moment for England to press its advantage, to commit every available ship and resource to crush the enemy once and for all. But the Royal Navy hesitated. The ships were too damaged, the crews too exhausted, the treasury too empty. The political will in London was too fractured. The strength required for that one last push simply wasn't there. Britain had the tactical advantage, but lacked the strategic endurance to deliver the knockout punch. And in that moment of hesitation, the war escaped Britain's control. The Dutch ships slipped away into the safety of their harbors to repair, rearm, and wait. The trade routes remained contested, the war remained open, unresolved, and more dangerous than ever. The momentum was lost, and with it, the chance for a true victory. Britain had failed to end the war when it had the chance. An exhausted nation, a broken fleet, and a divided government could only watch as their enemy recovered. But the sea has a long memory. It remembers overconfidence. It remembers hesitation, and it rewards patience. As a quiet stillness settled over the waters of the Thames, a false sense of security crept in. The war seemed to be winding down, a stalemate accepted by all. But across the North Sea, on the distant Dutch coast, the enemy was not idle. They were not licking their wounds. They were preparing. They had learned from Britain's mistakes and were about to exploit them in the most audacious way imaginable. The dark clouds of a new storm were gathering, a storm that would strike not at sea, but at the very heart of England itself. And then, the Dutch sailed up the river. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into naval history compelling, please consider subscribing for more stories of victory and defeat.